The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves, the scent a familiar comfort to Thea Ashwood. Here, among the ancient trees and whispering ferns, she was not just an Omega, a rank that placed her at the bottom of the pack's rigid hierarchy. Here, she was a healer. The pack hierarchy was absolute and unchangeable in its physical reality, written into their very biology. At the top stood the alphas, powerful, dominant wolves born to lead, their wolf forms massive and terrifying, standing 6 feet at the shoulder. Then came the betas, the seconds in command, loyal and strong, nearly as large at 5 feet. Below them were the deltas, the warriors and enforcers. Then the gammas, craftsmen, teachers, workers. And at the very bottom, sometimes barely acknowledged at all, were the omegas. Omega wolves were the smallest of their kind, rarely exceeding 4 feet at the shoulder. Lighter boned, less muscled, built for speed and stealth rather than strength and dominance. In wolf form, the physical differences were visible, undeniable. The biology didn't lie. But there was something else about omegas that made their existence even lonelier. Their wolves were so suppressed, so deeply buried by the weight of the pack hierarchy, that they barely existed at all. Thea's wolf had retreated when she was 12 years old, shortly after her first shift. In a pack setting, surrounded by alphas and betas and deltas, an omega's wolf would sink deeper and deeper into dormancy, sometimes disappearing entirely. It was a survival mechanism. The omega wolf recognized it could not compete, could not challenge, could not even exist safely in the presence of so much dominance. So it hid. And when the wolf hid, it took the omega's shifter senses with it. Thea couldn't sense other shifters the way normal wolves could. That instinctive recognition, that pack awareness that let wolves identify their own kind, it required an active wolf. Without one, she was blind to the very thing that made her world unique. She knew this. Her mother had explained it when Thea was 13 and crying because she couldn't feel her wolf anymore. "It's not your fault, little one. Your wolf is still there, just sleeping very deeply. Some omegas go their whole lives without shifting again. It's the price we pay for peace. Our wolves hide so we don't challenge those stronger than us, so we don't get hurt." "But Mama, how will I know who's pack and who's rogue? How will I sense danger?" "You'll have to rely on your human senses, darling. Your eyes, your ears, your mind. It's harder for us, but we survive." And so Thea had learned to live without her wolf. She'd learned to navigate the world more like a human than a shifter, relying on logic and observation rather than instinct and pack sense. She didn't think about it much anymore. It was simply how her life was. Her small cottage, nestled deep in the woods in the remotest corner of the Drake Pack's vast territory, was a full day's journey from the central packlands. She had lived here for only 2 months since her mother's death. Before that, she'd lived in a different settlement on the eastern border, far from the capital. The move had been necessary. Her mother's will specified this cottage, the place where her mother had chosen isolation over the pack's scorn. Omegas could be useful, even valued for their skills, but they would never be respected. Thea's healing was needed. The pack used her remedies gladly, but she herself was invisible. They took her medicines from the edge of her clearing without meeting her eyes, left payment without a word, treated her like a shopkeeper, not a pack member. Her rank meant she could serve, but never belong. She could be essential and worthless simultaneously. That was the Omega's paradox. That was why the sound of panicked thrashing and a low, guttural growl shattered her peace so completely. It was a sound of pure agony, of a wild thing fighting for its life. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to run back to the relative safety of her cottage and bar the door. But the sound that followed, a pained, desperate whine, pierced through her fear. It wasn't the sound of a predator. It was the sound of a victim. She couldn't turn away. With her basket clutched tightly in one hand, she moved cautiously toward the noise, her soft-soled boots making barely a whisper on the forest floor. Pushing aside a thick curtain of ferns, she saw it. And her breath caught in her throat. It was a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size, larger than any she had ever seen, even among the most powerful alpha shifters of her pack. Its fur was the color of a starless midnight, thick and matted with dirt and blood. A cruel hunter's snare, its metal teeth glinting wickedly with an oily sheen, was clamped tight around its front leg. The ground around it was torn to shreds, a testament to its desperate and futile struggle. But it was the eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten amber, glowing with a feral intensity that spoke of immense power and unbearable pain. Thea stared at the massive creature, her mind racing. This wolf was enormous, far larger than any natural wolf she'd ever seen. But then, she'd seen alpha shifters in wolf form before, and they were massive too. Was this a shifter, or just an unusually large wild wolf? She couldn't tell. A normal wolf would know instantly, would sense the shifter presence, feel the pack connection or lack thereof. But her dormant wolf gave her nothing. No instinct, no recognition, just silence. She studied the creature. The trap was silver-laced. She could see the oily coating. Silver was used by hunters specifically for shifters, but also for large predators. It didn't prove anything. The intelligence in those amber eyes was striking, but wild wolves could be intelligent too. The size could be explained by good genetics and ample prey. Without her wolf to guide her, she had to rely on what seemed most likely. This was probably a wild wolf. A massive, powerful one, but wild nonetheless. If it was a shifter, surely they would shift back to ask for help? Surely they'd give some sign? The fact that it remained in wolf form suggested it was simply an animal. An animal in terrible pain. The wolf stilled as it scented her, its massive head lifting. A snarl ripped from its throat, a sound so deep and menacing it vibrated through the soles of her feet. Its lips peeled back to reveal teeth like daggers. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Thea. The power radiating from it was suffocating, an almost physical pressure in the air. But she had no way of knowing if this pressure was shifter dominance or simply the terrifying presence of a massive apex predator. Her wolf sense would have told her. Without it, she was guessing. Yet Thea stood her ground. She saw past the terrifying display of aggression to the frantic terror in its amber eyes. She saw the raw, exposed bone where the silver-laced snare had bitten deep into its leg, the flesh around it angry and festering. "Easy now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She held up her empty hands, showing she meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. I want to help." But Thea didn't back down. She slowly, carefully, knelt on the ground, making herself smaller, less of a threat. She reached into her basket and pulled out a small bundle of lunar herbs, a potent relaxant she used for agitated shifters after a difficult transformation. "This will help with the pain," she said softly, her voice a calming balm. She pushed it forward gently. The wolf's nostrils flared, testing the scent. Its growl softened, just a fraction, a low rumble of suspicion rather than outright aggression. It watched her, its intelligent eyes tracking her every move. Thea knew she was taking a colossal risk. A wounded animal, especially one this size, could lash out without warning. But the healer in her refused to let this magnificent creature suffer. She began to speak to it, her voice a low, steady murmur. She told it about the herbs she was collecting, about the way the sunlight filtered through the canopy, about the little wren who had built a nest in the eaves of her cottage. She spoke of simple things, calm things, weaving a web of peace with her words. Slowly, miraculously, the wolf's rigid posture began to relax. Its ears, which had been pinned back against its skull, twitched forward. The snarling stopped, replaced by a low, pained whine. It lowered its head onto its paws, its amber eyes never leaving her face. It was waiting, trusting. Thea's heart ached with pity. "I have to touch it," she whispered, pointing to the metal trap. "I have to get it off you." She reached out a trembling hand, expecting teeth to close around it. Instead, the wolf simply watched her, its gaze intense. Her fingers brushed against its fur, and a jolt like lightning shot up her arm. It was warm and electric, a feeling of connection so profound it stole her breath. She pulled back slightly, startled. What was that? Perhaps just the static of thick fur, or her own nervousness making her hypersensitive? The wolf flinched but made no other move. It was waiting for her to continue. Working quickly, her fingers deft and sure from years of practice, she found the release mechanism on the snare. It was old and rusted, stiff from disuse. She had to put all her weight into it, gritting her teeth with the effort. With a loud snap, the metal jaws sprang open. The wolf let out a sharp yelp of pain as the pressure was released, scrambling back, its injured leg held uselessly off the ground. It could have run, it could have turned on her. Instead, it stood a few feet away, panting, its amber eyes fixed on her. It was free, but it was badly wounded. Thea knew it wouldn't survive long on its own. "Your leg," she said softly, already pulling bandages and a pot of salve from her basket. "Let me see to your leg." Cassius Drake was fire and agony. The world was a red haze of pain, the scent of his own blood thick in his nostrils. His wolf, the beast he had struggled to contain for months, was in complete control, driven mad by the teeth of the trap. The involuntary shifts had started 6 months ago. His wolf would seize control during moments of stress or at random, forcing the transformation and then shutting Cassius out completely. The man would be trapped inside, screaming, while the beast ran wild. Shifting back required the wolf to relinquish control willingly, and his feral wolf refused. He'd spend days trapped in wolf form, unable to return to his human body. The silver made everything worse. Silver didn't just poison, it made shifting excruciatingly painful and dangerous, like bones shattering and reforming through fire. His wolf, already feral and in control, refused to even attempt it, despite the man screaming inside to transform and ask for help. He was the Alpha King, ruler of all the packs in the kingdom, and he was dying in a piece of silver-laced metal like some common stray. The pressure of his rule, the endless disputes between packs, the constant vigilance against enemies, and the profound, aching loneliness of being without his fated mate had worn him down. He'd slipped his guards hours ago, using a hidden passage known only to the royal family, secret tunnels that led beyond the castle wards into passages carved by his ancestors. By the time Marcus realized which escape route he'd taken, Cassius could be anywhere in 100 square miles of wilderness. His feral wolf had learned to mask his scent when wild, a survival instinct that made tracking him nearly impossible. They'd be searching the northern forests now, following the false trail he'd left. His beta Marcus knew of his escapes but couldn't stop them, choosing instead to quietly manage the kingdom in his absence and pray his king returned alive. Then, through the red fog of pain, a new scent cut through the stench of blood and fear. It was subtle, yet intoxicating. Wild chamomile, clean earth, and something else, something uniquely her. But there was something wrong with the scent. It was muted, suppressed, as if wrapped in layers of cotton. An omega, his wolf registered. But more than that, an omega whose wolf was so deeply dormant it was almost gone entirely. He understood immediately. She couldn't sense him. Her wolf was too suppressed to recognize a fellow shifter, even one as powerful as a king. To her wolf-blind senses, he would seem like nothing more than a large wild animal. Which meant she had no idea what she was approaching, no idea of the danger. She was treating him like a wounded beast, not a volatile feral alpha on the edge of control. A woman appeared through the ferns, small and unassuming, an omega. Her eyes, the soft, gentle brown of a forest doe, were filled not with fear, but with compassion. His wolf lunged, snarling a warning. Danger, too close, might hurt her. But she didn't run. She knelt, those doe eyes studying him with such gentle concern that something in his chest cracked open. He watched, his wolf's fury warring with a strange, burgeoning curiosity as she spoke to him. Her voice was like a cool stream washing over a fevered brow. It didn't quiet the beast, not at first, but it gave the man, Cassius, a foothold. He clung to the sound of her voice, to the calm rhythm of her words, using it as an anchor to pull himself back from the brink of pure instinct. She spoke of herbs and sunlight, simple, grounding things that cut through his royal burdens and the animalistic rage. The red haze began to clear from his vision. He saw the genuine concern on her face, the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she examined the trap. She had no idea what he was. She thought he was just a wild wolf, and she was helping him anyway. When she pushed the bundle of herbs toward him, the scent was a balm to his frayed nerves. His wolf, still suspicious, nonetheless quieted. The snarling ceased. He lowered his head, a gesture of reluctant submission that shocked the king within him. He had not submitted to anyone in his entire life, yet for this small Omega, who couldn't even sense what he was, his powerful wolf willingly made itself vulnerable. The moment her hand touched his fur, a shockwave went through him. It was not pain, but a searing, brilliant energy that lit up every cell in his body. The bond, dormant and aching within him for years, flared to life with an intensity that staggered him. Mate. The word exploded in his mind, a revelation so profound it nearly broke him. His wolf, his wild and untamable beast, recognized her instantly. Mate. Ours. Protect. Heal. The commands were primal, absolute. All the rage, all the pain, was swept away by a tidal wave of possessiveness and a desperate, overwhelming need to be near her. He forced himself to remain still as she worked on the trap, every instinct screaming to pull her close, to scent her properly, to mark her as his. The pain of the snare was nothing compared to the agony of holding back. When the trap sprang open, the blinding pain in his leg was a distant echo. His first thought was of her. He scrambled back, not to escape, but to put a safe distance between them, terrified that his volatile wolf would hurt her in its desperate joy. He was free. She had freed him. He stood, panting, his amber eyes locked on her as she pulled out bandages. His mate. This quiet, gentle Omega was the other half of his soul, the one destined by the moon goddess to be his Luna. The one person in the entire world who could calm the storm inside him. And she had no idea. She saw only a wounded animal. Her suppressed wolf couldn't recognize the bond, couldn't feel the pull. To her, he was just a beast that needed healing. Which meant he would have to be careful, so careful. He couldn't reveal himself too quickly, couldn't frighten her. He had to let her come to trust him first. "Your leg," she said, her voice soft with concern. "Let me see to your leg." His wolf whined, a sound of pure, helpless adoration. It wanted to lie down and present its belly to her, to let her do anything she wished. Cassius, the king, fought for control. He couldn't reveal himself, not yet. It was too dangerous. He was filthy, bloody, and in the form of a feral beast. He would terrify her. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He took a hesitant step toward her, then another, and slowly, carefully, lay down on the forest floor, extending his mangled leg. He trusted her, completely. He watched her as she worked, her touch surprisingly firm and confident. She cleaned the wound with a cool liquid that stung but also soothed, her fingers gentle as she applied a thick, fragrant salve. The pain began to recede, replaced by a warm, tingling sensation. Her scent was all around him, a cocoon of peace. He found his gaze drawn to the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat, and his wolf stirred with the instinct to press its muzzle there, to feel her life beating against him. He fought it down, focusing instead on the details of her face, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the way a stray strand of honey-brown hair fell across her forehead, the deep concentration in her eyes. She was beautiful. Not in the flashy, polished way of the court she-wolves, but in a real, elemental way. She was a part of this forest, as natural and essential as the trees themselves. When she finished wrapping his leg in clean bandages, she sat back on her heels, a small, tired smile on her lips. "There," she said, as if to a child. "That should hold until you can get back to your pack. You should rest and heal before you travel." "She thinks I have a pack to return to. She thinks I'm just a lost wolf who wandered too far from home." He wanted to stay. His wolf was practically begging, whimpering in the back of his mind, to lie here at her feet forever. But the man knew he couldn't. His guards would be searching for him. The kingdom couldn't be without its king for long. But he would come back. Now that he'd found her, he would come back every night if he had to. He met her eyes, trying to pour all of his gratitude, all of his dawning wonder into his gaze. He gave a soft nudge to her hand with his nose, a gesture of thanks, and was rewarded when her smile widened. Then, with a reluctance that felt like tearing a part of himself away, he rose. He gave her one last, long look, memorizing her face, her scent, the feeling of her presence. Then he turned and limped into the deep woods, vanishing as silently as he had appeared. He didn't go far, just to a place where he could watch her, unseen. He saw her gather her things, her movements slow and thoughtful. She kept glancing back at the spot where he had been, a small frown on her face. He stayed until she had disappeared on the path back to her cottage, and only then did he allow himself to head toward the castle. His leg throbbed, but his heart felt more whole than it had in his entire life. The chaos was gone, replaced by a singular, unwavering purpose. Her. Thea Ashwood. His mate. The Omega who couldn't sense what he was, but who had saved him anyway. Thea returned to her cottage feeling strangely empty. The encounter in the forest had left an indelible mark on her. She couldn't stop thinking about the massive black wolf, about the raw power and intelligence in its amber eyes. There was something about it that nagged at her. That strange electric jolt when she'd first touched its fur, the way it had understood her words, responding with such deliberate, almost human gestures. But without her wolf to guide her, she couldn't make sense of it. Was it a shifter? Or just an unusually intelligent wild wolf? She had no way to know, and asking herself the question over and over wouldn't change that. She went about her evening chores in a daze, sorting the herbs she'd gathered, simmering a pot of stew over her small hearth. But her mind was elsewhere, back in the clearing, replaying every moment. The way its growls had softened, the hesitant trust it had shown her, the gentle nudge of its nose against her hand before it left. It was foolish, she knew, to feel such a connection to a wild animal. And yet, she felt a pull toward it, a sense of kinship she rarely felt with her own kind. She found herself worrying. Was its leg healing properly? Had it found its way back to wherever it came from? Was it safe from the hunters who had set that cruel trap? Sleep did not come easily that night. She tossed and turned, her dreams filled with images of a dark forest and glowing amber eyes that watched her with an unnerving intensity. When she woke, the feeling of being watched lingered. She dismissed it as foolish fancy, a byproduct of her overactive imagination and the unsettling encounter. But as she went about her day, tending her garden and brewing tinctures, the feeling persisted. It was not a malevolent presence, but a protective one, like a silent guardian standing just at the edge of her perception. She found herself speaking aloud as she worked, half hoping the wolf could somehow hear her. "I'm worried the frost will get to the last of the mint," she murmured, pinching a leaf between her fingers. "And Old Man Hemlock's cough sounds worse. I need to make a stronger syrup for him." It was silly, but it eased the profound loneliness that was her constant companion. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and rose, she was sitting on her porch steps, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, when a twig snapped in the woods nearby. She froze, her hand tightening around her mug. A pair of luminous amber eyes emerged from the shadows. It was him, the black wolf. He was standing at the tree line, watching her. His leg was still bandaged, and he favored it slightly, but he stood tall and proud. Thea's heart gave a joyful leap. He had come back. "You came back," she whispered, a wide, genuine smile spreading across her face. The wolf took a hesitant step forward, then another. It moved with a quiet grace that belied its immense size, its paws silent on the ground. It stopped a few feet from the porch, its gaze fixed on her. There was no aggression in its posture, only a quiet intensity, a question in its eyes. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly. She went inside and returned with a bowl of leftover stew, the meat and vegetables rich with broth. She set it on the ground, then retreated to the steps to give it space. The wolf approached the bowl cautiously, sniffed it, and then began to eat, its hunger apparent. Thea watched, fascinated. She felt no fear, only a deep sense of rightness, as if this were exactly where this magnificent creature was supposed to be. When it finished, it licked the bowl clean, and then, to her astonishment, it walked right up the steps and lay down at her feet, its massive body a warm, solid presence beside her. It rested its head on its paws, its amber eyes closing with a soft sigh of contentment. Thea's hand trembled as she reached out to stroke its head. Its fur was thick and surprisingly soft. A low sound rumbled deep in its chest, a sound halfway between a growl and a purr. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure. And so their routine began. Every evening, just as the sun began to set, the wolf would appear at the edge of the woods. He would share her simple meal, then lie at her feet as she sat on her porch. She talked to him, telling him everything. She told him about the difficult pack members who looked down on her, the small joys she found in her garden, her secret dreams of one day seeing the ocean. She gave him a name, Shadow. He was her silent confidant, her quiet companion. He listened without judgment, his presence a profound comfort. She would often find herself stroking his fur, her fingers mapping the powerful muscles of his back, scratching behind his ears in the spot that made his leg thump against the wooden porch. In those moments, the crushing weight of her omega status, of her isolation, would lift. With Shadow, she wasn't Thea the omega healer. She was just Thea, and she was not alone. That third evening, as the wolf, Shadow, lay at her feet, Thea found herself doing something she'd never done before. She lay down beside him on the porch, her head resting against his warm flank, and looked up at the stars. "I used to do this with my mother," she whispered, "before she got sick. We'd lie in the garden and she'd tell me stories about the constellations. The great wolf, the hunter, the three sisters." She traced the patterns with her finger. "Do you see them?" Shadow shifted, turning his massive head to look where she pointed. His amber eyes reflected the starlight. "Mother said the great wolf was the first of our kind, placed in the sky by the goddess to watch over all wolves forever. She said that when we die, we run through those stars, free and wild for eternity." Her voice caught. "I hope she's running there now. I hope she's not alone anymore." The wolf made a low, mournful sound. He shifted his body, curling around her protectively, his head coming to rest near hers. It wasn't a wolf's instinct. It was a person's comfort. Thea's breath hitched. "Sometimes you seem so human," she whispered. "The way you listen, the way you understand. I know it's foolish, but I feel like you're not just a wolf, like you're someone." Shadow went very still. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that made her heart race. Recognition, longing, and a deep, aching sadness. "Whoever you are," she breathed, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers trembling. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for making me feel less alone." He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch, and a sound escaped him that was almost like a sob. They stayed like that for a long time, her small form tucked against his massive one, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for both of them, it was the most perfect moment they'd ever known. The nights continued like this. Every evening at sunset, Shadow would emerge from the forest. Every evening, Thea would feed him and talk to him and stroke his fur as they sat together in comfortable silence. She still didn't know what he was, shifter or wild wolf. Her dormant wolf gave her no answers. But it mattered less and less with each passing day. He was Shadow. He was hers. That was enough. For Cassius, these evenings were his salvation. The moment he left the oppressive stone walls of the castle and took on his wolf form, the crushing weight of the crown lifted from his shoulders. The constant political maneuvering, the endless petitions, the burden of 1,000 lives resting on his every decision, it all faded away. The only thing that mattered was the path through the forest that led to her. He lived for the moment he would see her cottage, a warm beacon of light in the deepening twilight. He lived for the sound of her voice, the gentle touch of her hand, the simple peace of lying at her feet. His wolf, the beast that had been a raging tempest within him, was now a calm, devoted creature in her presence. It purred under her touch, content and whole in a way Cassius had never been. He learned more about her from these one-sided conversations than he had ever learned about any of the nobles in his court. He learned of her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of scorn, her deep kindness, and her secret loneliness that mirrored his own. His protective instincts, already heightened by the mate bond, became a fierce, burning fire. He wanted to storm into the pack den and punish every person who had ever made her feel small. He wanted to shower her with jewels and silks, to give her the world. But he knew he couldn't, not as a wolf. And he was terrified to reveal himself as a man. What if she feared him? What if she rejected him? The king was a symbol of power and authority, a figure far removed from her simple life. Would she look at him and see the man, or only the crown? He was ashamed of the weakness that had led him into that trap, ashamed of the lack of control he had over his own wolf. She had healed him, calmed him. She was his mate, his equal, his other half. But she thought he was just the wild animal she'd rescued. And there was a strange, bittersweet beauty to that. She didn't know his rank, didn't know his power, didn't know his crown. She saw only the creature before her and chose kindness anyway. She couldn't sense the bond. Her suppressed wolf prevented it, but he could feel it growing stronger every day, every touch, every gentle word strengthening the golden thread between them. So he kept coming back, night after night, stealing these precious moments of peace, falling more deeply in love with the gentle Omega, who had no idea she held the heart of her king in her hands. Yet he could not entirely abandon his duties. He would return to the castle late each night, often past midnight, and work until dawn, surviving on far less sleep than any man should. In the war room, Marcus, his beta, covered for him during council meetings when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, watching with growing concern as his king walked a razor's edge between two worlds. The Drake Kingdom was comprised of 12 major packs and dozens of smaller clans, all sworn to the Alpha King. Cassius Drake ruled them all from the capital, but each pack maintained its own alpha, its own territory, its own internal governance. The Bloodclaw Pack, under the brutal Fenris, had claimed the Western Wastelands, a borderland that was nominally Drake territory but had been in dispute for generations. Rumors had been swirling for weeks of the Bloodclaw Pack testing the borders. They were a ruthless pack, led by an alpha named Fenris, who was known for his brutality and his ambition. After long, grueling days in the War Council, debating strategy and receiving grim reports from the front lines, his wolf would pace the confines of his royal chambers, snarling and agitated, demanding release. The only thing that could soothe it was the thought of Thea. His nightly journeys to her cottage became his lifeline, the only moments he felt sane, the only time the king and the beast within him were in harmony. Thea, blissfully unaware of the political turmoil, noticed the change in Shadow. He seemed more restless, his amber eyes scanning the dark woods with a heightened vigilance. The purr-like rumble in his chest was often replaced by a low, protective growl at any unfamiliar sound. The snap of a distant twig, the hoot of an owl. He would press himself closer to her, a solid wall of fur and muscle, as if to shield her from a threat she couldn't see. Her own anxieties began to grow, but for a different reason. The number of hunters' traps in the forest had increased. Twice on her herb-gathering walks, she had come across the cruel metal snares, disarming them with a growing sense of anger and dread. They were getting closer to her cottage. She feared for Shadow's safety. "You have to be careful," she told him one evening, her fingers twisting in the thick fur of his ruff. "They're everywhere. I don't want you to get hurt again." The great wolf rested his head in her lap and looked up at her, his eyes soft with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It looked like a promise, a silent vow of his own caution. The danger, however, was not just from human hunters or metal traps. One afternoon, while searching for bloodroot near the creek that marked the informal edge of her territory, Thea stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. Wolf tracks, but they were not from her pack. Even without her wolf sense, even with her dulled shifter instincts, something about these tracks was deeply wrong. The way they moved was wrong, too coordinated, too purposeful. The marks on the tree nearby, claw marks that were too deliberate, too aggressive, spoke of intelligence and malice. And the look she imagined in the eyes of whatever had left these marks? It was a malice no wild animal possessed. This had to be enemy wolves, blood claws. They were encroaching, moving deeper into the territory than ever before. Panic seized her. She was an Omega, alone and far from the protection of the main pack. To a rival pack, she was an easy target, a pawn to be captured or eliminated as a message to the Drake Alpha. She fled back to her cottage, her heart pounding, bolting the door behind her. That evening, when Shadow appeared, he was more agitated than she had ever seen him. He paced the length of her small porch, his head low, a constant menacing growl rumbling in his throat. He kept sniffing the air, his gaze fixed on the dark woods. He refused to eat, his attention wholly focused on the unseen threat. Thea knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his thick neck. "What is it, boy? What's wrong? Do you sense them too?" He whined and pushed his head against her chest, nudging her toward the door of the cottage. The message was clear. "Go inside. Be safe." "I'm not leaving you out here," she said, her voice resolute. She stayed with him, her hand resting on his back, drawing comfort from his strength even as she feared for him. They sat like that for what felt like hours, two lone figures braced against the encroaching darkness. Cassius was consumed by a cold, silent fury. He had scented the Bloodclaw scouts hours ago, their foul stench an insult to this sacred ground. His ground. Her ground. His wolf was a hair's breadth from losing control, demanding he shift fully to his war form, hunt them down, and tear them limb from limb for daring to come so close to his mate. It was only Thea's presence, her hand on his back, her steady heartbeat against his side, that kept him anchored in his current form. The Bloodclaw scouts had been testing the borders for weeks, growing bolder with each passing day. They had marked her cottage 3 weeks ago, when they first crossed into Drake territory during their reconnaissance. What Thea didn't know was that the scouts had been watching her cottage intermittently since then, noting her isolation, her routine, her complete vulnerability. To Fenris, she was the perfect target, a Drake pack member, alone and unprotected. Taking her would send a message and provide leverage. The hunting party had been in position for 2 days, waiting for her nightly visitor to leave. But the Black Wolf never left. And tonight, their patience had run out. He had to protect her. He couldn't shift to human form to warn her properly. The silver was weakened now, but still in his system, and the pain would be excruciating. He couldn't explain the danger in words, couldn't tell her to flee to the castle where she'd be safe. He could only stand guard, a silent protector against the shadows. Suddenly, his ears swiveled, catching a sound Thea's human senses missed. The whisper of movement through the undergrowth. Not one wolf, but 3. They were coming. He rose to his feet, his body instantly shifting into a battle stance. A snarl ripped from his throat, no longer a warning but a declaration of war. Mine. Protect. The command was absolute. The king and the beast were one, with a single overriding purpose: to defend their mate at any cost. Thea saw the change in him and scrambled to her feet, her heart seizing with terror. "Shadow, what is it?" she cried. Before she could understand, 3 figures emerged from the tree line. They were wolves, but they were lean, scarred, and mangy, their eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. Their lips were pulled back in vicious snarls, and the way they moved, too coordinated, too intelligent, their formation too perfect, spoke of trained killers, not wild beasts. Blood claws. Even without her wolf sense, she knew what they were. The tracks she'd found, the foreign, aggressive presence. These were enemy wolves, raiders, killers. They weren't just scouts. They were a hunting party, and their hungry eyes were fixed on her. The 3 bloodclaw wolves fanned out, their movements fluid and predatory. They were smaller than Shadow, but they moved with the chilling coordination of a seasoned hunting party. Their focus was entirely on Thea, seeing her as the weak link, the soft prey to be isolated and taken down. Thea was frozen in terror, her mind screaming but her body refusing to move. The primal fear of the predator-prey dynamic was absolute. She was an omega, and these were killers. Shadow moved to stand directly in front of her, shielding her with his body. He was no longer the gentle companion who rested his head in her lap. He was a creature of pure, concentrated fury. His snarl was a terrifying sound, a promise of violence that made the very air vibrate. The lead bloodclaw, a grizzled brute with a scarred muzzle, took a bold step forward, its teeth bared. It was testing him, challenging his claim to the territory and the female he was protecting. Cassius did not hesitate. The time for silent guardianship was over. With a roar that was more lion than wolf, he launched himself forward. The sheer speed and power of his attack were breathtaking. He collided with the lead wolf, and the sound of the impact was like a tree trunk snapping in 2. They went down in a whirlwind of black and gray fur, teeth flashing and claws tearing. Thea cried out, her hands flying to her mouth. The other 2 wolves, seeing their leader engaged, broke in opposite directions, attempting to flank Shadow and get to her. It was a classic pack tactic. But Shadow was not a normal wolf. Even as he fought the alpha, sinking his teeth into the brute's shoulder and shaking him with brutal force, he was aware of the other 2. He threw the grizzled wolf aside with a flick of his powerful neck, sending it crashing into a tree with a sickening thud. He spun, intercepting the second wolf just as it lunged for Thea. He met it head-on, his jaws closing around its throat in a single, decisive move. There was a wet, crunching sound, and the wolf went limp. He dropped the body and turned to face the third attacker without a moment's pause. The last bloodclaw, seeing its packmate so easily dispatched, hesitated. Its bravado vanished, replaced by a healthy dose of fear. It backed away, whining, its tail tucked between its legs. Shadow took a step forward, a low, deathly growl rumbling in his chest. The message was unmistakable. Leave, now. The wolf turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. The scarred leader, struggling to its feet, saw its last packmate desert it. It gave Shadow one last look filled with hatred and pain before it too limped away into the forest. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by Thea's ragged breaths and Shadow's heavy panting. He stood over the body of the wolf he had killed, his massive chest heaving, his black fur spattered with blood. He turned to look at her, and in his amber eyes, she saw not the gentle companion, but the lethal protector, the apex predator, something far more than just a wild animal. Her mind raced. The power, the intelligence, the way he'd fought with strategy and awareness, the way he'd positioned himself to protect her above all else. "You're not just a wolf, are you?" Before he could respond in any way, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air, and a silver-tipped arrow embedded itself in Shadow's shoulder. He roared in pain, staggering back. Hunters, drawn by the sounds of the fight. 2 men stepped out of the trees, their crossbows raised. They were rough, weathered men, poachers from the neighboring human settlement, who ventured into these woods illegally. "Got him!" one of them yelled, a triumphant grin on his face. "That beast's been terrorizing the woods." They saw Thea then, and their grins widened. And look what we have here. A pretty little thing playing with wild animals. You're coming with us, girl. Fear, sharp and acidic, flooded Thea's system. But seeing Shadow wounded, seeing the arrow shaft sticking out of his shoulder, ignited something else within her. Rage, a fierce, protective instinct she never knew she possessed. "Get away from him!" she screamed, placing herself between the hunters and the wounded wolf. The men laughed. "Move aside, little girl. That's a dangerous animal." "He saved me!" she cried. "You're the monsters here!" Shadow, despite the silver burning in his shoulder, snarled and tried to rise, to put himself in front of her again. But the silver, a poison to their kind, was already weakening him. He stumbled, his leg buckling. He was vulnerable. Cassius knew he was out of time. The silver was sapping his strength, and his wolf form was compromised. He couldn't protect her like this. The hunters were already reloading, their movements confident and cruel. There was only one choice left. It was a choice he had desperately wanted to avoid, a truth he was terrified to reveal. But her life was on the line. And her life was worth more than his secrets, more than his fear. He had to shift. For the first time in months, the wolf and the man were in complete agreement. Protect mate. The wolf willingly gave him back control, merging their purpose into one. The word resonated through the mate bond, a desperate pulse of meaning and emotion. She couldn't hear it as words, her wolf was too suppressed. But she felt it, a sudden, overwhelming sense of apology, of love, of plea for forgiveness. Thea gasped, her head whipping around. Something had just touched her mind? Her heart? She didn't understand it, but she felt it. The hunters paused, looking around in confusion. "Who's there?" one of them snapped. Shadow looked directly at Thea, his amber eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Forgive me." And then it began. A sound of cracking bone and tearing flesh filled the air. The pain was unimaginable, like his bones were being shattered and reformed through fire, the silver making every second agony. But her life was worth any torment. The wolf's form began to contort, to writhe and reshape itself in a way that was both horrifying and magnificent. The hunters stared, their crossbows forgotten, their faces masks of pure, slack-jawed terror. Thea couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She could only watch as the creature she had nursed and confided in was unmade and remade before her very eyes. Fur receded into skin, the powerful muzzle flattened and softened into human features. The massive canine body elongated and reformed into the limbs of a man. Where the massive black wolf had stood, there was now a man. He was tall and powerfully built, naked, with blood and dirt streaked across his skin. An arrow with a wicked silver head protruded from the hard muscle of his shoulder. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, and his eyes were the same molten amber, glowing with an intensity that was all too familiar. But it was his face that made her world tilt on its axis. She'd never seen the king in person, had never been close enough to the capital to attend any ceremonies where he might appear. But she'd seen his profile stamped on coins collected from pack members. She'd seen the tapestries in the pack hall on the rare occasions she'd been summoned there. A face of stern authority and absolute power. A face she recognized despite never having seen it in person. Cassius Drake, the Alpha King. He stood between her and the hunters, his body a living shield, just as it had been in his other form. "You will lower your weapons," he commanded. His voice was not loud, but it was filled with an ancient power that made the air itself vibrate. The alpha command that no shifter could disobey. The hunters, who were minor shifters from a lesser border pack, found their arms moving against their will, their crossbows clattering to the ground. Their eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond mere surprise. They were in the presence of their king, their Alpha King, whom they had just shot. "And you will leave my territory," the king continued, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And you will never hunt in these woods again. If I ever see your faces again, I will not be so merciful." The men scrambled backward, falling over themselves in their haste to obey. They turned and ran, their flight as pathetic as their earlier bravado had been arrogant. They vanished into the night, leaving behind only the scent of their fear. The clearing was silent again. Thea stared at the man before her, the king, her king. He turned to face her, his expression not one of power, but of raw vulnerability. He swayed on his feet, the silver arrow's poison taking its toll. "Thea," he breathed, his voice rough with pain and emotion. Then, his amber eyes rolled back in his head, and the Alpha King collapsed at her feet. The world swam back into focus slowly, reluctantly. The first thing Cassius was aware of was the scent: chamomile, dried lavender, and the unique, comforting fragrance that was purely Thea. He wasn't in the cold, unforgiving forest. He was indoors, lying on something soft. A bed. Her bed. He forced his heavy eyelids to open. He was in a small, rustic room, the ceiling made of rough-hewn wooden beams. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow over everything. He tried to sit up, and a sharp, searing pain in his shoulder sent him falling back against the pillows with a groan. "Don't move," a soft voice said. Thea was there, sitting in a chair beside the bed. Her face was pale in the firelight, her eyes wide and filled with a confusing mix of fear, awe, and concern. But her hands were steady as she checked his bandages, the professional healer taking precedence over her shock. "The arrow, the silver," he began, his voice hoarse. "I got it out," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "and I packed the wound with moon petal and silverbane root. It will counteract the poison and help you heal." It had taken every ounce of her strength to drag his unconscious form inside and cover him with her quilts. He looked down and saw that his shoulder was heavily bandaged with clean linen. She had saved him. Again. But the comfortable routine of their strange relationship was shattered. The truth was between them now, a vast and daunting chasm. He was no longer her stray, her shadow. He was her king. And he had no idea what she was thinking. You're him," she whispered, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were clenched tightly in her lap. "The Alpha King. You were Shadow. All this time." "My name is Cassius," he said, his voice still rough. "And yes, I am." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. He could feel her turmoil through the bond, a chaotic mix of emotions that was a stark contrast to the peace he had always felt from her. He had terrified her, confused her, the one thing he had never wanted to do. "I am sorry, Thea," he said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I never meant for you to find out this way. I never meant to frighten you. I never meant to deceive you." She didn't respond immediately. Her fingers twisted in her lap, her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of the impossible. "You were a wolf," she said finally, her voice small. "Every night. You came to me as a wolf. Why?" "The pressure of being king," he began, his voice low. "The constant demands, the loneliness. It's a heavy weight. My wolf, he couldn't bear it. He grew restless, wild. I started losing control of my shifts. My wolf would seize control during moments of stress, forcing the transformation and then shutting me out completely. The man would be trapped inside, screaming, while the beast ran wild. I couldn't shift back because my wolf refused to relinquish control. I would try to evade my own guards during these episodes, terrified my increasingly aggressive wolf would hurt them. I'd use secret passages my ancestors built, tunnels that led beyond the castle wards. My feral wolf learned to mask his scent, making me nearly impossible to track. I'd run for hours, crossing into the remote edges of my territory where patrols are sparse. Anywhere I could be alone. Anywhere the wolf could run without destroying everything. That day in the forest, when you found me, I was more beast than man. The pain of the trap, the silver coating it had, the rage consuming me. I was lost, feral. I couldn't think, couldn't control myself. The silver made everything worse, made shifting excruciatingly painful, like bones shattering through fire. My wolf refused to even attempt the transformation, despite me screaming inside to shift and ask for help. He met her gaze, his own amber eyes pleading for her to understand. And then you came. Your scent, your voice, you were like an anchor in a storm. You calmed the beast. You gave me a foothold to become myself again. You were the only thing that could pull me back. Thea listened, her expression unreadable. She was processing the impossible, trying to reconcile the gentle, wounded animal she had cared for with the powerful, burdened ruler of her entire world. So you kept coming back, she stated, not as a question, but as a realization. As a wolf, every night. I had to, he confessed, his voice breaking. Those evenings with you, they were the only moments of peace I've had in years. Lying at your feet, listening to you talk about your day, about your worries, about the stars. It was the only time my wolf and I were not at war with each other. You brought me a quiet I didn't know existed. He risked reaching out, his hand covering one of hers. Her skin was soft, warm, and a jolt of that same electric energy he'd felt in the forest shot through him. The mate bond singing between them. She gasped softly, feeling it too this time, now that she was touching him skin to skin in human form. I was a coward, Thea. I wanted to tell you who I was, but I was afraid. Afraid you would see only the king, or worse, the monster my wolf had become. I didn't want to lose what we had. Those moments where you saw just me. Not my rank, not my power, just the soul underneath. What we had? She asked, her voice trembling. I was talking to a wolf. I named you Shadow. I fell asleep against you. I told you things I've never told anyone. And I cherished every word, he said with raw honesty. I cherished that name more than my own crown, because you gave it to me, the real me, not the king, but the broken creature you saved. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the struggle to understand. He had to tell her the final, most important piece of the truth. There's another reason, Thea. The most important reason. The reason my wolf recognized you from the very first moment. The reason your presence is the only thing that can soothe me. He took a deep breath, preparing to lay his entire soul bare before her. The moon goddess creates one perfect mate for every shifter. A second half to our soul. It's rare. So rare that most wolves never find theirs. Perhaps 1 in 100. Maybe 1 in 200. The mate bond exists from birth, but it's dormant. Waiting. For most wolves, when they encounter their mate, they know immediately. Their wolf recognizes the other wolf, and the bond activates. They can sense each other, feel the pull, explaining her specific situation. But that recognition requires both wolves to be active and aware. It requires that pack sense, that shifter awareness that lets us recognize our own kind. He squeezed her hand gently. Your wolf is suppressed, Thea. So deeply dormant that you can't sense other shifters, can't feel pack bonds, can't recognize what you are in others. For months, my wolf sensed you. Somewhere in my territory, my mate existed. It was a faint pull, a direction, but no specific location. Your suppressed omega scent made you impossible to track. The bond existed, but was dormant, sleeping, waiting for touch to wake it. The bond requires physical touch to fully activate, skin to skin, or even through fur. The moment you touched me in that forest, life-changing. The bond flared to life inside me. My wolf knew, instantly, completely, without question. That faint pull transformed into an unbreakable golden thread connecting us. Thea Ashwood, you are my mate, my fated mate, the other half of my soul. Thea snatched her hand back as if burned, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's impossible. I'm an omega. I'm nobody. I can't be a king's mate. It doesn't matter what your rank is, he insisted, his voice rising with passion. He tried to sit up, despite the protest of his shoulder. The physical differences are real. Alphas are larger, stronger. But the treatment of omegas, the denial of your rights, your status as lesser, that's pack tradition, not biology. And traditions can be changed. My soul recognized yours. You are my other half, the Luna my kingdom has been waiting for. The moon goddess herself chose you for me. Being small doesn't make you worthless. Being gentle doesn't make you weak. The goddess made omegas for a reason, and it wasn't to be trampled. A Luna? She stood up, backing away from the bed, wrapping her arms around herself protectively. I'm a healer who lives in a cabin in the woods. I'm no one. I can't be a Luna. I can't be yours. The rejection, however gentle, was a physical blow. The bond between them recoiled, sending a shard of ice through his chest. His wolf howled in despair inside his mind, clawing to get out, to go to her, to make her understand. He saw the fear in her eyes, the weight of his declaration crushing her. He had moved too fast, overwhelmed her with too many earth-shattering truths at once. He had to pull back, to give her space to breathe. Thea, he said, softening his voice with visible effort. I know this is overwhelming. I know I've just upended your entire world. I am not asking you to accept everything right now. I'm not demanding anything from you. I am only asking you to believe me, believe that what I felt, what my wolf felt in your presence, was real. The peace you gave me was real. The bond between us is real. He looked around the small, cozy room, at the herbs hanging from the rafters, at the worn but comfortable furniture, at the life she'd built in solitude. This place, he said, his voice thick with emotion, this little cottage has been more of a home to me than my own castle. Because you were here, you, Thea, not an omega, not a rank, not a position. You, the woman who spoke to the stars and worried about her mint, and saw the soul inside a monster. Her defensive posture softened slightly, her gaze drifted around her home, seeing it through his eyes. She saw the exact moment her fear began to recede, replaced by a dawning wonder, a hesitant curiosity. When you were a wolf, she began slowly, carefully, and I would talk to you. Did you understand? Everything? Every word, he confirmed, a small smile touching his lips despite the pain. I remember you worrying about the frost on the mint. I know all about Old Man Hemlock's cough and how you accidentally gave him the wrong tincture once and felt terrible about it for weeks. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I remember you telling me about your mother, about the stars, about your dream of seeing the ocean. I remember you falling asleep against my fur and how it took everything in me not to shift right then and there just to hold you properly. I remember all of it, Thea, and I treasured every moment. A tiny, hesitant smile touched her lips. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The chasm between them was still there, but a fragile bridge was beginning to form. He had revealed his greatest secret and his deepest need, and she hadn't run. She hadn't fled. She was still here, still listening, still trying to understand. For the first time since collapsing at her feet, the Alpha King felt a genuine flicker of hope. The next 7 days passed in a surreal blur. Cassius remained at her cottage, recovering from his wound. The silver had done its work, and even with his accelerated healing, the injury was severe. It forced a strange domesticity upon them. She, the Omega healer, found herself tending to the most powerful man in the kingdom. She changed his bandages, brewed him healing teas, and cooked him simple, nourishing meals. He was a surprisingly good patient, accepting her care with a quiet gratitude that was far more unnerving than any royal command would have been. They talked. He told her of his life, of the crushing weight of his duties since his father's death 5 years prior. He spoke of the endless political games, the constant threats to their people, and the profound isolation of his position. She began to understand the immense burden he carried. She saw the man beneath the crown, the soul that had been so tormented his wolf had sought refuge in the wild. One evening, as they sat before the fire, he spoke of something that made her pause. My council has been pressuring me to choose a mate for years, he told her. They want an alliance, a political marriage to a high-ranking alpha female from a powerful pack. Lady Sienna from the Ironcrest pack has been particularly persistent. Thea felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Of course, that was his world, a world of strategy and alliances. It is my duty, he continued, his gaze intense. But I always refused. My father told me that ruling without your true mate is like trying to breathe with only one lung. It is a half-life. He was right. I would not chain myself to another for political gain when I knew my other half was out there somewhere. He leaned forward. And now I have found you. Cassius, I can't be what they want. What you need. Aluna should be strong, a leader. A high-born alpha. I'm an omega. People, they barely even see me. I see you, he said, his voice a low, fervent whisper. He moved closer to her. I have seen you more clearly than anyone in my entire life. I see your strength, Tia. It is not the loud, aggressive strength of an alpha, but a quiet, resilient strength that is far more powerful. You faced down a feral, wounded wolf with nothing but courage and compassion. You stood between me and armed hunters. You are the strongest person I know. His words were a balm on wounds she hadn't even realized were still so raw. All her life she had been made to feel less than, her gentle nature perceived as a flaw. He saw it as a strength. But the fear remained. It wasn't him she was afraid of anymore. It was his world. They will never accept me, she whispered. Then they will have to answer to me, he stated simply, his voice ringing with authority. You are my mate, my choice. That is the only thing that matters. He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. I don't want to change you, Thea. I don't want to make you into something you're not. I want you exactly as you are. The woman who talks to the stars, who worries about her mint, who sees the good in wounded beasts. The woman I've fallen in love with. Her breath caught. Love. He'd said it. Tears gathered in her eyes. I don't know how to be what you need, she whispered. You already are, he said simply, just by being you. The air between them shifted, charged with something electric. He was so close, his amber eyes dark with an emotion that made her feel like she was burning from the inside out. Her heart was racing. She could feel the warmth of his breath, see the slight part of his lips. Cassius, she breathed. I want to kiss you, he said roughly. I've wanted to kiss you since that first night on your porch, when you fell asleep against my fur. But I'm trying to be honorable, to give you time, to not rush. She kissed him. It was clumsy and inexperienced. She'd never kissed anyone before, but the moment their lips touched, the bond flared like wildfire. Golden light sparked between them. Heat and need and rightness flooded through both of them. Cassius made a sound deep in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair, the other spanning her waist. She melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt, kissing him back with an intensity that shocked them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. We should stop, he said, though he made no move to release her. Why? Her lips were swollen, her eyes dazed. Because if we don't, I won't be able to. His voice was strained. And you deserve better. You deserve to be courted properly, honored, cherished. He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then her nose, then her cheeks, each touch reverent. When you're ready, he murmured against her skin. When you're sure, then I will show you exactly how much I love you. But not before you're certain this is what you want. She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. I think I started falling that first night, when a wolf looked at me like I mattered. His answering smile was radiant, transforming his face with pure joy. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring, pouring all his love and devotion into it. On the morning of the 8th day, his shoulder was almost completely healed. He knew he could not stay hidden in her cottage forever. His kingdom needed its ruler, and more importantly, he needed to bring his mate home. "It's time, Thea," he said gently, finding her in her garden. "I have to go back, and I want you to come with me." Thea's breath hitched. She looked around at her small, peaceful world, the neat rows of herbs, the little cottage, the familiar trees. Leaving it felt like leaving a part of herself behind. "I belong here," she said weakly. "You belong with me," he corrected softly. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I know this is frightening. I know my world is not yours. But I cannot go back to it without you. You are my anchor, Thea. Without you, the storm will return. My wolf, he will not let you go, and neither will I." He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then another to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "Please, come with me. Let me protect you. Let me show you that your place is by my side." She looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words. She saw the deep, desperate love there. But she also saw the shadow of the lonely king and the wild wolf. He needed her. "Okay," she breathed. "I'll come." A brilliant smile transformed his face. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deep and passionate and full of promise. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips. "Thank you for trusting me." He sent a mental message through the beta bond to Marcus. Within the hour, a royal escort arrived. The warriors, clad in silver and black, stared in disbelief as their king emerged from the tiny cottage with Thea at his side. Thea felt their eyes on her and shrank back, her courage wavering. Cassius immediately moved to her side, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "She is with me," he said to Marcus, his voice leaving no room for argument. Marcus bowed his head. "As you command, my king." They rode to the castle, a massive stone fortress. To Thea, it looked like a prison. As they passed through the gates, she felt hundreds of eyes on her. Who is that? An Omega? With the king? Thea felt her cheeks burn. Cassius leaned down. "Look at me," he murmured. "Ignore them. You are with me. You are safe." She forced herself to look at him, to draw strength from his steady gaze. He led her to a suite of rooms. They were opulent, beautiful, but cold and impersonal. Sensing her discomfort, he guided her to the balcony. The gardens below were magnificent. "I know this is not your forest," he said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But you can make it yours. There is a greenhouse, an apothecary. You can grow whatever you wish." "I don't want to take you from your life, Thea. I want to add my life to yours." She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his warmth. She could do this. As long as he was with her, she could face anything. Over the next 2 months, Cassius was true to his word. He was a constant presence at her side, a buffer against the hostility of the court. He introduced her to the pack as the woman he loved. He showed her the greenhouse, which he put entirely at her disposal. Thea slowly began to find her footing. She spent her days in the greenhouse, her hands in the soil, coaxing life from dormant seeds. She began creating salves and tinctures, and her skills as a healer quickly earned her quiet respect among the servants and guards. The nobles remained aloof, but their scorn began to lose its sting. Their opinions mattered less when compared to the devotion in Cassius's eyes. Their bond deepened with every passing day. They spent their evenings together, walking in the gardens under moonlight, or sitting by the fire, talking for hours. He was no longer just the king, or just Shadow. He was Cassius, a man she was falling deeply in love with. One evening, she asked him about his family. "What happened to your mother?" Cassius stared into the flames. "She was my father's fated mate, a beta from the Silvermoon clan. They were happy. She gave birth to me and my sister. You have a sister? Had. His jaw tightened. She died young, a childhood fever. My mother never recovered from the grief. When my father died in battle 5 years ago, the bond severed, and she followed him within a month. She died of a broken heart. Thea reached up and touched his face. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He turned to her, pulling her close. That's why I refused to settle for anything less than a fated mate. I saw what my parents had. I saw the strength it gave my father. I couldn't chain myself to a political marriage knowing that real love was possible, even if I had to wait my whole life. And then I found you. She kissed him, pouring all her love into it. I love you, she said. I love you, he replied. More than my crown, more than my kingdom. You are everything to me. One night, under a full moon, Cassius led her to a sacred place, a clearing surrounded by ancient stones known as the Circle of Elders. Our pack needs to see it, he said. They need to see the bond, to see you as I do. He stood before her in the center of the circle, moonlight silvering his hair. Around them, hundreds of pack members had gathered, watching in hushed silence. Thea Ashwood, he said, his voice ringing with formal power, yet trembling with emotion. Before the moon goddess and the spirits of my ancestors, I choose you. I claim you as my mate, my Luna, and my queen. My wolf recognizes your wolf. My heart recognizes your heart. Will you accept me? Will you accept this bond and stand by my side as my other half? This was it, the public declaration. She looked at him, at her king, her protector, her shadow, her Cassius. She saw the hope and fear in his amber eyes. Something stirred deep within her, a presence she hadn't felt since she was 12, her wolf, responding to the bond, beginning to wake. The mate bond and Cassius's power flowing through it had been slowly unlocking her wolf's potential over these months. It was no longer cowering, but filling with strength that came from him. The Alpha King's power flowing into her, giving her wolf the courage to emerge. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the sacred circle. I accept you, Cassius Drake. I accept this bond. I will be your Luna. As she spoke, a shimmering golden light erupted from her chest, flowing to him. A matching light flowed from him, and the two currents intertwined, wrapping them in a brilliant cocoon. The pack gasped. They could feel it, the power of the bond, the rightness of it, the goddess's blessing radiating outward. The goddess. The blessing. It's real. Even the skeptics felt the undeniable truth. In that moment, Thea was no longer an Omega. She was the Luna, chosen and blessed. And she was home. The circle erupted in cheers. Wolves howled in joy. Cassius pulled her into his arms and kissed her before all his people. When they broke apart, both were crying tears of joy. He turned her to face the gathered pack. Your Luna, he declared, blessed by the goddess herself. The pack bowed as one. She had done it. She was home. The acceptance changed everything. It was a tangible shift in power that resonated throughout the pack. Thea could feel Cassius's emotions as if they were her own, a steady undercurrent of contentment and protectiveness. He could feel her quiet strength spreading through the pack. The blessing had silenced even the critics. Lord Henry and his faction could not argue with divine will. They offered respect, their bows deeper. The pack began to see what their king had seen. Thea blossomed. She transformed the greenhouse into a thriving apothecary. She walked through the settlement, offering help to anyone in need. Her kindness won hearts. They called her Luna Thea not out of duty, but affection. She was not the political powerhouse the council wanted, but she was the heart of the pack. Their evenings were cherished. Often, they would shift. Cassius's wolf was no longer a creature of rage, but magnificent and playful. Thea's wolf emerged fully, sleek, honey gold, her own wolf given confidence by the bond, not borrowing his strength, but finding her own through their connection. Her first shift had been awkward, but his wolf had been patient, nuzzling her, guiding her. When she stood on 4 legs, she was mortified. Her wolf was small, dainty. Compared to him, she looked tiny. She whined, ears flattening. But his massive wolf approached gently and nuzzled her. He circled her, then did something shocking. He lay down and rested his head on his paws in complete submission. To her. The largest wolf submitting to the smallest. The message was clear. Size doesn't matter. You are my equal. Her wolf stepped forward and touched her nose to his. When they ran together, he matched his pace to hers. And when she tired, he let her curl into his warmth, protected and cherished. Running beside him, she was not Omega or Luna. She was simply a wolf, wild and free with her mate. They would chase each other through moonlit forests, rolling in grass, howling at the moon in pure joy. But the blood-claw threat had not vanished. Fenris was enraged, massing forces on the border. The war council was tense. This time Thea was present, seated at Cassius's right hand. "He will strike at the Western Pass," Lord Henry insisted, pointing at the map. "It is the most direct route. We need to fortify the main garrison and—" "No," Thea said softly. Everyone turned to look at her. Lord Henry's expression was a mixture of surprise and barely concealed irritation. "When I found their tracks near my cottage months ago, they were not on a direct path. They were flanking, moving through thick forest where patrols are sparse. The maps you're using show the Whispering Woods as impassable due to the ravine. But I've lived there for years. A landslide 3 years ago created a land bridge that crosses the deepest part of the gorge. The maps are wrong. They can cross there. Fenris won't use the main pass where we expect him. He will attack through the Whispering Woods using that land bridge, hoping to catch us by surprise and come up behind our fortifications." A heavy silence fell over the room. Several generals leaned forward to study the maps more closely. Marcus's eyes widened in recognition. Cassius looked at her thoughtfully, then at the map. He trusted her instincts completely. "She is right," he declared, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "My mate has lived on that border for years. She knows terrain that hasn't been surveyed since before the landslide. She's tracked their scouts and knows their patterns firsthand. They move like predators seeking weak points, not warriors seeking glory in open battle." He turned to Marcus. "Send word immediately. Double the patrols in the Whispering Woods, especially near the ravine. I want scouts to locate this land bridge and confirm its accessibility. Then set traps and ambushes throughout the woods. We will turn their advantage into their grave. Let them think they're being clever. We'll be waiting." Lord Henry studied the map again, then looked at Thea with newfound respect. "If you're right, Luna, you may have just saved hundreds of lives." Acting on Thea's intelligence, the Drake warriors spent 2 days preparing the perfect trap. Scouts confirmed the land bridge exactly where she'd described it, wide enough for a war party, but narrow enough to create a bottleneck. When the Bloodclaws tried to sneak through the Whispering Woods 3 nights later, confident in their secret route, they walked straight into a killing field. The battle was swift and decisive. Drake warriors attacked from the high ground on both sides of the land bridge, with archers raining silver-tipped arrows down on the trapped Bloodclaws below. Fenris fought with desperate savagery when he realized the trap, his massive gray wolf taking down a dozen warriors with brutal efficiency before Marcus got behind him. The beta's silver blade sank deep into Fenris's shoulder, right between the shoulder blades where the spine met. The poison took him down fast. His legs buckled and he collapsed, snarling and snapping but unable to rise. The rest of the Bloodclaws, seeing their leader fallen and surrounded, either surrendered or died fighting to the last. Fenris was dragged back to the capital in silver chains, barely conscious from the poison. His execution was swift and public, a necessary message to any other pack that might consider challenging Drake authority. But his death broke the Bloodclaw unity completely. With no heir and no clear succession, the pack fractured into 4 separate factions within days. Within a month, 3 of those factions sent emissaries requesting to join the Drake Kingdom, seeking protection and stability. Cassius accepted 2 of the groups after careful vetting, the ones whose leaders genuinely wanted peace. The third faction, led by Fenris's brother, who was nearly as brutal, was denied and driven into the wastelands beyond the kingdom's borders. Thea stood beside Cassius on the battlements as the victorious warriors returned, their armor dented but spirits high. The pack gathered in the courtyard below, and when they saw their Luna standing beside their king, a spontaneous cheer went up. Luna, Luna, Luna. It started with the warriors who'd fought in the Whispering Woods, the ones whose lives she'd saved with her knowledge. Then it spread through the crowd like wildfire, until hundreds of voices were chanting her name in genuine gratitude and respect. Lord Henry approached and bowed low to both of them, his aged face sincere. Luna Thea, he said, his voice carrying across the battlements so others could hear. Your wisdom and intimate knowledge of our lands has saved countless lives. I was a fool to ever question your value to this pack. You are not just our Luna by the goddess's blessing. You have proven yourself the greatest strategic asset this kingdom could ask for. His eyes met hers directly, and she saw genuine remorse there. I was wrong about Omegas, about you, about what makes someone worthy of leadership. You've taught this old wolf that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room speaks the greatest truth. Tears welled in Thea's eyes, not from the victory, but from the acceptance she saw reflected in the faces below. From finally, truly belonging. Thank you, Lord Henry. Your words mean more than you know. Home, later that night they stood on their private balcony overlooking the peaceful kingdom. The celebrations continued below, bonfires burning, music playing, the joyful sounds of a people who knew they were safe. Cassius wrapped his arms around Thea from behind, pulling her close against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. My wise, brave Luna, he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. What would I do without you? You would still be a king, she said, leaning back into his embrace, her hands covering his where they rested on her stomach. But I would not be whole, he replied, his voice breaking slightly. He turned her gently to face him, his amber eyes blazing with love in the moonlight. You came to me in the dark, Thea, when I was more beast than man, and you led me into the light. You healed the wolf, you tamed the beast, and you saved the man. You gave me peace when I had none, hope when I'd lost it, and love when I thought I'd never find it. She turned fully in his arms, reaching up to cup his face with both hands. She looked into his amber eyes, those same eyes that had watched her from the shadows, that had trusted her in the forest, that had looked at her with such desperate love even when she couldn't understand what he was. We saved each other, she whispered, her thumbs stroking his cheekbones. You saw worth in me when no one else did. You gave me a place to belong, a purpose beyond survival. You loved me when I felt unlovable. He lowered his head and kissed her, soft and tender at first, then deeper, more passionate. It was a kiss filled with gratitude for the past, joy for the present, and promise for the future. A kiss that held every unspoken word, every shared moment of pain and triumph, every dream they'd built together. When they broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, his hands framing her face. I believe I made you a promise once, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that made her shiver. What promise? She asked, though she could see the heat in his eyes and had a very good idea. I promised that when you were ready, when you were certain, I would show you exactly how much I love you. His thumb traced her lower lip. Are you ready, my Luna? My mate? My Thea? She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but love, devotion, and barely restrained desire. Yes, she breathed. I'm ready. I'm certain. I'm yours. His eyes flared golden, and in one smooth motion, he swept her up into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Cassius! She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. I am keeping my promise, he murmured against her ear, carrying her through the balcony doors into their chambers. And I always keep my word to my mate. She pressed her face against his neck, breathing in his scent, pine and earth, and something uniquely him. I love you, she whispered. I love you, he replied, kicking the door shut behind them with his foot. More than words could ever express. Let me show you instead. 6 months later, the Omega Protection Decree was the first law Lunathea proposed to the Royal Council. She stood before the assembled lords and ladies, no longer the frightened girl from the forest, but a Luna who had proven her worth in both wisdom and action. Her voice was clear and unwavering as she read the decree. All Omegas within the Drake Kingdom are hereby recognized as full pack members with equal rights to property ownership, pack representation, and protection from forced matings. Omega children shall be educated alongside all other ranks without segregation or limitation. Omega specialists, including healers, craftspeople, and scholars, shall receive fair wages equal to their skills, regardless of rank. Any pack member who discriminates against or harms an Omega shall answer to the throne. Lord Henry, despite his newfound respect for Thea, argued for 2 full sessions. Luna, I mean no disrespect, but you're disrupting social structures that have maintained order for thousands of years. The hierarchy exists for a reason. Without it, how do we maintain pack stability? What happens when Omegas start challenging for positions they're not suited for? Several other council members nodded, clearly uncomfortable with such sweeping changes. Thea stood calmly, letting the murmurs die down before responding. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority she'd learned from Cassius, not loud, but absolutely commanding attention. Lord Henry, you speak of disrupting the natural order. But let me ask you this. When I gave you the intelligence that saved hundreds of warriors in the Whispering Woods, was that disrupting the natural order? When I healed the wounds of our returning soldiers, including your own son who took an arrow to the chest, was I unsuited for that position? She stepped forward, her eyes sweeping the council. The goddess herself chose an Omega as your Luna. She blessed our bond before every member of this pack. If the hierarchy is so natural, so absolute, how do you explain that? How do you explain that your king, the most powerful alpha in the realm, found his perfect match in someone you claim is unsuited? The physical differences are real. I do not deny that alphas are larger, stronger in body. But being small doesn't make me worthless. Being gentle doesn't make me weak. The goddess made Omegas for a reason, and it wasn't to be trampled and ignored. Perhaps the hierarchy you speak of isn't natural at all. Perhaps it's just tradition. And traditions, Lord Henry, can be changed. A heavy silence fell over the council chamber. Lord Henry opened his mouth, closed it, then slowly bowed his head in acknowledgement. He had no answer. No one did. The decree passed by a significant majority. It would take time, generations perhaps, for true change to take root. But seeds had been planted. Already, Omega children in the capital were attending lessons alongside Alpha and Beta children. An Omega merchant had opened a shop on the main square and was thriving. Small changes, but real ones. Thea stood in the nursery, her hand resting on her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant with twins, a boy and a girl. The royal healers confirmed they were strong, healthy, thriving. She could feel them moving now, little flutters and kicks that made her smile. Cassius entered quietly, not wanting to disturb her peaceful moment. He moved behind her and wrapped his arms around her, his large hands covering hers on her stomach, completely enveloping it. Feeling them? He murmured against her hair, his voice filled with wonder. Every time he felt them move, it was like witnessing a miracle. Always. They're active today. She leaned back against his solid warmth, feeling safe and loved. I think they're fighting already. She paused, a shadow crossing her face. Do you think they'll be alphas? Betas? What if one of them is an Omega like me? Does it matter? His voice was absolutely certain, without even a moment's pause. To the kingdom it might, to your council, They'll have expectations. The kingdom, Cassius interrupted, his voice taking on that royal authority that brooked no argument. Will love them regardless of their rank. Our children will be raised, knowing their worth isn't determined by their size or their position in some arbitrary hierarchy, but by their character, their kindness, their choices. His voice gentled, becoming intimate again. They'll be raised by a mother who shows them every day that true strength comes in many forms, just like their mother taught me. She turned in his arms to face him, tears gathering in her eyes, happy tears this time. I love you, he replied, pulling her close, mindful of her belly. More than my crown, more than my kingdom, more than words could ever say. You and these little ones, you're my whole world. Through the large nursery window, they could see the settlement below, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. People moved about their business, and there, clearly visible, an Omega merchant stood proudly at her stall in the main square, meeting customers' eyes, haggling with confidence, treating and being treated as an equal. Change, slow but undeniable. We did this, Thea whispered, watching the scene below. Together. We did, Cassius agreed, his hand splaying protectively over her belly where their children grew. And we're just beginning. Our children will grow up in a different world than we did. A better one. That evening, when the full moon rose high and silver, 2 wolves emerged from the castle grounds and ran toward the forest. One black as midnight, massive and powerful, moving with lethal grace. One honey gold, smaller but swift and sure, her movements confident now, no longer tentative. They ran side by side, perfectly matched despite their size difference, their howls echoing through the ancient trees, a sound of perfect harmony, of 2 souls that had found each other against all odds. A sound of belonging, of home, of love that transcended rank and tradition, of 2 broken souls made whole by each other. In the heart of the woods, a forgotten Omega had found a trapped wolf. In the heart of a king, a lost soul had found his anchor. In the heart of the kingdom, a new era had begun, where worth was measured by character, not rank. And in the heart of the forest, under the light of the full moon, 2 souls ran free, forever home.